I feel like we can start with introductions, maybe.
And then maybe how we met, and
Yeah.
then kind of going in our storyline of what we've been doing so far.
And yeah, what we think about digital, like high level, what we think about digital fashion, and then we'll obviously allow for any questions. And then we have a lot of thoughts about what's happening in the space. It's obviously really nascent, and there's a lot to be done, so we can kind of take it as it goes. So we'll just see what happens. But I can kick off with my intro. So I'm Aleksija Vuj. I'm an investor at Multicoin Capital. For those of you who don't know, we're kind of one of the OG crypto funds in this space. We have a liquid fund and an illiquid fund. We're historically known for our DeFi and infrastructure investments, but I joined the team about a year ago to build out the consumer crypto arm. So I always joke that I get to do the fun stuff at work. And yeah, I spend a lot of time in digital fashion, social, music, obviously everything that falls under the consumer arm. But this is my space. This is where I feel the best is in digital fashion. And so
yeah, she always says this is the most fun in every crypto conference. I love it. So I'm Jules. I'm one of the co-founders of Enzo Collective. We're building a curation platform connecting brands and designers with their tastemakers. We envision it almost as a Pinterest where you can find and recommend things and earn as you go. We're also having a little bit of like the intersection of like gamifying the fashion experience, because a lot of it right now, you see it through Instagram, you see it through TikTok, but we want to find like a curated space where people can actually talk. And the most amazing thing about Web3 is that, right? Like having these cultivated communities where you can chat with other people about it and be able to co-create together. So I think something that has been always interesting is Aleksija and I met, I think it was maybe last October or something like that.
Yeah, almost a year ago.
Yeah, and we I think spoke the first thing about the intersection of digital and physical. And maybe we can ask like one question, like has anyone ever purchased a digital fashion NFT? Okay.
One, nice. Good adoption. This is good. I don't blame you. So I think that something that we talk about a lot, and this is, I think, where it's like a good kicking off point is what is digital fashion? What is maybe phygital fashion, which, yeah, we're going to use that word, sorry. And what are the use cases that exist for it right now, and then what should they be into the future? So I think about how digital fashion right now, I think, has this kind of, in my opinion, really negative connotation of being used in the metaverse, whatever the metaverse means. The metaverse typically refers to kind of gaming worlds, whether it be Roblox or otherwise. It's worn by maybe an avatar that lives in these worlds. But the fact of the matter is that no one's spending time in metaverses. No one even knows really what a metaverse is.
Yeah.
And there's little to no use case for that specific interpretation of digital fashion. So I think that there's a conversation to be had, which, and I know Jules has thoughts on this too, about like actually what is digital fashion, how should it be used, and then what is that intersection with social media, which I think is the intersection to focus on, and that's kind of where we can go into. But I think maybe you have thoughts on like what digital fashion is right now also.
Yeah, I think I see digital fashion as a collectible. It's art, right? You curate it, you like to, like a lot of these NFTs that exist currently, like what has it been because of? And it's mostly because of a hype, right? Someone posts on Twitter, they're like, oh my God, they're in a Discord group, and then they all purchase it together. But I see digital fashion as a way people can represent themselves and a way they can create a collection without having to fund it initially, right? Because I think the most important thing about fashion that a lot of people don't understand is fashion is super expensive, right? The tools to build a company, very expensive. Most of the times is you have to go find a manufacturer, which a lot of times is mostly in network, which fashion is very traditional if we look at like the several years. And the thing that I always think about is like, okay, with digital fashion, you could learn in a couple months if you're motivated, right? You could go on the computer, you could design something, and you could represent it. And maybe it could be a physical in the future, but I think that having digital representation and using it as a funding mechanism is a really important use case of digital fashion.
Yeah, and then you go into the way that it should be used. So this is my personal thesis on what's wrong with digital fashion right now. Is so you kind of move away from the metaverse interpretation of it, and I think what we need to move towards is digital fashion and social media. So if you think about where fashion is being used right now, it's actually really interesting. Dani Loftus, who's the founder of Drop, has this great quote where she talks about how we go online, we purchase digital assets, which are digital representations of physical fashion. You receive the physical fashion rather in the mail, and then you go and you post yourself wearing that physical fashion on social media. So you have this kind of physical good that's bookended by two digital experiences, and could you make it digital streamlined across? But I think what's the most interesting part of that journey is actually the posting on social media at the end. And it's the idea that the majority, frankly, of fashion that we're wearing right now, it's a status, not majority, fashion is a status symbol. Where do we flex our status? We flex it on social media. So where should digital fashion be built for? It should be built for these social media experiences. And how do you do that? You do it through AR. And that's why I'm extremely bullish on augmented reality, like on AR, digital fashion that can be worn through AR, that you can then share on social media platforms like Instagram or TikTok or what have you, which is the natural kind of place for this content and context to live, because it's where we're already using fashion as a status symbol and signal to begin with. And I think that that's something that's being really underutilized right now, but that companies like 010 are working on. For example, Drop is working on building on AR pieces, Tribute Labs, for example. And I think that that actually is where digital fashion should head, but isn't right now. And I honestly cannot understand why.
We always talk about this AR because obviously from starting with Snapchat, but I think the biggest debate is, would people actually pay for this, right? 010 right now is almost completely free. They do have some limited drops where you do pay for it, but at what cost are you going to pay for a digital piece that's never going to be obtainable in real life, right?
We talk about this a lot in Multicoin. Sorry, I have so many thoughts on this. Okay, if you think about digital fashion as a status symbol, because like I said, that's really what it is. If you look at digital fashion purely, there's no cost of goods sold, really. Obviously, there's maybe a small base just for whatever the digital asset requires to create it, but the COGS is very, very minimal. And so if you think about pricing in the real world, pricing is often based on COGS plus some kind of margin, right? But that margin is really just status in the physical world. And that's why Hermes, for example, can demand such a high revenue multiple, because their status is much higher than a Zara, for example, the status that they signify. So if you go into the digital world, when there is no physical good to base the price on, all you have to base the price on actually is status. And if status is the most valuable asset within this determination of price, then pricing actually could be much higher than it ever is in the physical world, because you're willing to pay much more for a status only good, whose status you can then show to so many more people because you're using it on social media, rather than the physical world where only, let's say, the 20 people that you interact with that day can see your outfit. And so I can see a world in which digital fashion actually ends up being way more expensive than physical fashion, even in AR, because of this. And you can see the first kind of instantiations of that, where wasn't it the Gucci Dionysus bag that sold for $4,300 on Roblox, when in real life it's only valued at around $3,200. And it's for exactly that reason. People are willing to pay more for status. I'm actually so hyped on pricing. People get really down on it because they're like, what are you paying for? Whatever. But we don't pay for material. We don't pay for really quality. We pay for status.
Yeah, we mostly pay to post a picture on Instagram. Like most of what is happening on Instagram is just posting about different places that you're visiting, different clothes shops that you're going to. So I think it's very interesting, the combination. But I think also bringing in together digital fashion with physical fashion, because right now what happened? Like the last release was Dior with the shoes, with digital physical, and then also Louis Vuitton with the trunks. I don't know, did any of you guys see that campaign that they did with Louis Vuitton?
The Louis Vuitton
Any
trunks?
thoughts? Any hot topic, spicy thoughts on it?
By the way, if anyone has questions throughout, just feel free to raise your hands. But so the Louis Vuitton trunk, how much did they price it at? It was
I think it was
$39,000, right? Yeah. And the idea was you basically bought a Louis Vuitton trunk. You didn't actually know what was in the trunk. All it really represented was a membership, effectively a membership to Louis Vuitton. And people were astounded that anyone would be willing to pay $39,000 for what is effectively an NFT and then a physical trunk.
Yeah. But again, it goes back to the principle of status, right? If you could post about it, that you were at the event, you got access to that event, you basically, I remember there was this whole campaign of a Web2 influencer style of a bunch of Web3 and Web2 influencers coming together and posting about it on Twitter and also on Instagram. And so many people were hyped on it. Maybe it wasn't always the best decision. I didn't think so. But I thought it was really funny because, again, it's like for status, right? It's the only reason why they did it is maybe there's a resale value in the end, but not with the trunk itself because it was soulbound. But I think again, I'm like, okay, where are we promoting this status? Where is it going to be in a more decentralized way, which is right now it's only on Instagram and Twitter.
I think that there's a comment to make here about NFTs and digital fashion, which we just had a little conversation about, a conversation about outside. And then I think we should move maybe into sustainability and phygital goods and what that's going to mean for the fashion industry, because I know it's something we focus on a lot. But I think one of the main problems in crypto right now is that we use NFTs, which are effectively just a name for a technology at its base, and we use that to represent an end rather than a means to the end. And I think that's a huge issue where by the future, the hope is if fucking Web3 works, which hopefully it will, that's why we're all here, the idea is that every asset you buy on the internet should ideally be an NFT underneath it, but you would never refer to it as an NFT. You'll refer to it as a top or a song or a this or a that, whatever the actual asset itself is, not the technology that underlies it. And right now we're still referring to digital fashion as purchasing an NFT. This trunk was a Louis Vuitton NFT. Drop released a Cape NFT. Yeah, and just to finish that thought, is just the idea is hopefully in the future, every single fashion item that you buy on the internet, whether it's phygital or digital, will be an NFT. You just won't refer to it as such. Go ahead. Wait, we might have a mic if you want it. Yeah, it's right there. Thank you. I get to turn it off.
But those, the two concepts you just spoke about now are two very different concepts in the very different markets. What you spoke about before, which was digital fashion, which is people buying digital images for their own good feeling of and spending a lot of money on it, is a very, very different world completely to creating the world of everything, a fashion item that gets sold will be sold via NFTs, via blockchain.
I don't think those are different things. I think that
Why?
I think that digital assets will be sold as NFTs and phygital assets will be sold as NFTs. The point is that not in both worlds, whether it's digital only or phygital, you should never refer to it as an NFT ideally, right?
Correct. NFT is the vehicle of how you get to the end solution. It's agreed, but there's still two very, very different, meaning we're combining two very different discussions here. A discussion of are people going to be spending money and value on digital fashion, which is we can actually disagree on it, but it's okay. Yeah. We disagree on that point whether it's going to last and be sustainable long term. But there's the other aspect of every fashion item that we buy can be authenticated and be bought as an NFT on the blockchain. So two very different discussions, but both done by the same means.
Sure.
Both, right.
Sure. I think that they're just, I don't consider them in opposition, do you?
No, not at all. They're just different.
Yeah. I do agree.
Yeah.
So I think that the important delineation that you're pointing to is that there's digital fashion and then there's phygital fashion. Digital fashion is the discussion that we were having around where status becomes that much more important because there's no physical component. And then to your point, there is phygital fashion. But I think we can both imagine a future in which you go onto a marketplace, which you're building, that would be the future Farfetch, the future Net-a-Porter, the future what might have you, and you could buy both digital-only assets and phygital assets, and they'll both be NFTs, right? And I think that was more the point.
Yeah, that would now be taking two different markets and then combining together, which is incredible.
Well,
which is the future of long-term for one-on-ones, like a sneaker of I wouldn't say Yeezys, but any of Jordans, one-on-one Jordans. You would buy the NFT, and then you would get with the value that you get, you'd be able to get physical with it.
Yeah, totally agree.
And to agree on that is I think it's evolving, right? And what we're talking about is we don't want to just call it as an NFT, but we realize that digital fashion, physical fashion, it's going to take a very importance in our life, and we see it more as almost like a digital receipt. And a question I have for all of you, what do you know what's in your closet, realistically? What do you know? What do you have? If you've ever sold clothes on a secondary market, also, how do you know where it's from? Do you have a receipt of it? Imagine you had a receipt of every single thing you purchased, and it also gave you recommendations for what you would like in the future. And that's kind of where we, I think, align on that part, where we envision it almost as a digital receipt that then could provide loyalty points, for example.
Yeah, I think I can go into like a little spiel about phygital, because that's kind of what we're getting into, like to leave the pure digital behind for a sec. This is the phygital world that we're talking about, and it's the idea is, what does the phygital world unlock? So obviously the thesis for the future is that hopefully every single fashion item, I will delineate that from like true utilitarian goods, like maybe like the underwear you buy at Target, but like even Parade makes underwear that I would consider a fashion item. So every fashion item in the future should be phygital. And the idea of a phygital good is that your physical item, like this skirt, will have a little NFC chip in it. Hopefully we'll get to the point where like you don't even need a full chip. And that NFC chip will link you to the digital version of that good, which will be represented as an NFT. So if you think about the phygital world, is something that I've been focusing on a lot, is how do you build this kind of phygital stack? So the way that I envision it, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts as well, is that there's many layers. So you start with a protocol, because you'll need a protocol, a centralized protocol that enables the buying and selling of phygital goods, because maybe you buy online first, or you buy physical first, and you're going to have to redeem those for the opposite good. If you buy and sell down the line, it's how do you prove authentication, et cetera, et cetera. How do you prove that the buyer has received both the digital and the physical item? There's a lot to do that's being run through protocols like Boson protocol, Solaire protocol, et cetera. So then you move one step up the stack, and then you have the NFC chip. The NFC chip obviously is hardware. Okay, I say obviously, but there are so many companies. Sorry if anyone works at any of these, but like IYK, Kong, if you work there, come talk to me later, because I consider this a hardware play, and I don't understand really how you can brand these, or why brands would pay for branded NFC chips, which is it's a commodity.
Yeah, I see it. A lot of the protocols are doing it for merch, so they could have the physical and digital merch. It's something also easy. IYK makes it, I think, very simple to start with them. And basically, they have the different counterparts. So one of the biggest things in fashion is manufacturing, right? So that's where I'm like coming into that.
Yeah, fair. Okay, so you have the NFC chip. That's what connects. It's the commodity that connects the physical and digital good. You move one step more up the stack, and you have the consumer-facing platform, which is something that I talk about a lot, but doesn't actually exist yet in this phygital stack. And this is the idea of kind of what Jules was touching on, which is this phygital closet. When you get your phygital good, the physical item lives in whatever your closet, but where does the digital asset live? Hopefully in the future it will live in a consumer-facing platform where you'll have kind of this closet or makeup counter, for example, that your friends should be able to interact with, you should be able to interact with. You collect all of the context around your phygital goods. So events that you've attended, playlists that your piece reminds you of, photos you've taken in it, I don't know, people you've met, signatures you've acquired, et cetera, and all of that context should live in one place, which I know that you're kind of building. So.
Yeah. So it's like essentially you're building a social graph for yourself. And I think that's the coolest thing is because like a lot of times it's a very much a woman thing, but I always tell this story all the time. I go to the bathroom or I go to a random place and I compliment on someone's outfit. Then it starts the story of like, oh, where are you from? What do you do for work? And connecting that dots. And if there was a way that I could connect with them, like 9DC does this as well, it's where you could tap into the chip and basically build this social graph around that. I think honestly that's the future. And I don't know if anyone has seen Clueless before, where basically, like most women also like don't want to have to decide what they want to wear every day. That's like number one, right? Not everyone is a curator. Not everyone is a very fashion lover, but people want seamless, they want easy, they want recommendations, right? That's why we're on social media all the time. But kind of bringing it back to that is like, yes, we're building something towards that because I envision the future as like a way where there's, you have your consumer app. You can connect with people who also have the same vision. You can go to events with people who also like the same things, like the same brands. You could even find maybe like a dating thing on that as well. Like imagine there's also another person, your counterpart, that really enjoys fashion or enjoys the events that you're going to.
I think the like Web3 dream is always that you connect with people through the things that you own, right? The ownership graph, it's like make-believe. But this is, I think, one of the closest instantiations of that. Do you want to pass the microphone back?
Yes. So I hear you talking about connecting with your peers and people that like the same types of brands, same types of products. We work in digital fashion as well. We work with Luxo.
Love Luxo.
So what we are exploring specifically is how we can reconnect the consumer and the story that goes on behind the product, and also like all the effort that went into it, all the resources, and then kind of use that infrastructure to create a more meaningful relationship. So do you have some thoughts on that, maybe?
Oh, okay, wait. Before bringing that up, so Aleksija was just on a podcast talking about attribution for the creator itself. And I think this comes into play because a lot of times as a curator, like you can't track all your data, right? The brand has that opportunity. So I think there's an excellent play here where blockchain will enable the opportunity to be able to track all these different purchases, being able to connect and create more of a social layer to it.
To answer your question more directly, though, I think what you're talking about is the life cycle of the product before it gets to the consumer and helping the consumer then understand what is in that, what's in behind that product, right? And that's what I envision actually living on this consumer-facing platform is if you had the digital asset, that digital asset as an NFT should be able to hold the metadata that tracks this life cycle through the supply chain, right? And I think that that's really exciting for the consumer to be able to kind of just tap a little button, read the main points like was this created, by whom, what are the materials, etc. This brings to mind, though, something I think we talk about a lot before we get to co-creation, which is the idea of sustainability. If we agree or disagree on this. Basically, I think the whole argument for sustainability in digital fashion and phygital fashion is total bullshit. There's like this argument that we're going to go towards digital fashion, it's going to reduce the need for physical clothes, all of this stuff, and then also by learning more about where your physical item has come from, you're going to be more conscientious, blah, blah, blah. I think it's all false. First of all, if we've looked at the trends that social media has instigated, when you saw people wearing more outfits on social media on a daily basis, your consumerism increased because you were incentivized to buy more clothes to be able to post more on social media. And I can't imagine digital fashion having any other effect than that. If you see if you see AR, like a girl changing her digital outfit 5 times a day, why wouldn't that translate to at least something similar of a trend in the physical world? And I think that we'll end up consuming more as a result to keep up with this like even faster rate. And then if you move towards the ESG side of like learning where your clothes came from, I think consumers are more or less interested in that. But you go back to all these research studies and surveys that they're doing with Gen Z, for example, where Gen Z is like, yes, we love sustainability, we're willing to pay more, we'll pay 10% more is always the figure that's quoted. And then when you actually face them with the dollar value, yeah, you're shaking your head. They're never willing to pay more, ever. No one pays more for sustainability. And it's like consumers want to feel good about the clothes that they buy, but they don't actually want to pay for that. So I think if you can keep it at the same price, for example, show them the life cycle, show them the supply chain, make them feel good about their purchase, that's a win-win. But not typically for like a dollar increase, which is super frustrating.
Yeah, a final remark and then I'll pass on the mic. But I think there's a huge opportunity for exploring the digital realm to create an additional layer of value there. So
totally.
You might be able to charge the surplus and to have the story conveyed in the digital realm. Maybe through services like repair services or resale, rental, those kinds of things. But thank you.
No,
yeah.
I think that's a great point. Sorry, quickly. I actually think that if you think about what phygital goods enable, which is allowing you to collect more context for your good, if each physical item can collect context, you can actually create what I'm calling an identity for that good. And that identity should be able to, in effect, charge its own value. So the secondhand market becomes that much more interesting because now you can say, well, this skirt has met Beyonce and like this skirt went to this conference and blah, 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 blah. And now this skirt is so much more valuable than a nearly identical skirt that hasn't met Beyonce. And I think that that's something that's really interesting for the sustainability argument is how we can improve the value of the secondhand market, to your point, by giving each piece a story. So, yeah, I totally agree. Do you want to? Yeah, pass it to anyone.
No, okay, fine.
All right, I was a little late. Great talk so far, though. So you mentioned social media, too, and one of the things I always notice, my wife's very into fashion things, and I see what she's seeing. She sends me stuff. The comments are always like, where's that from, where's that from, where's that from? To get to your identity point. More broadly, I've also seen the trend in Gen Z where like the most high value goods are the secondary goods that are from the 70s and 80s because that's when the quality curve was higher. So I'm curious, I'm just kind of to give you an economic argument, I'm just curious if you agree or disagree with this and why. There's this idea that as economies develop, the average cost goes down and then the average quality plummets. And so what you see in these curves, it's like, oh, like you can always get the highest quality thing ever, but it's going to be very expensive. But on average, you get worse and pay less. And that's a good thing, quote unquote, because it gives people more access. Shein gives people more access to fashionable clothing, even though it's all worthless and going to go in the trash. So I'm curious to hear, like, do you agree with that's how the economics of fashion is going? And also, what do you think we can do to fix that, if we should fix it?
Do you want to go first? I feel like I've been talking a lot.
So just going back on that sustainability part, because I think that ties in really well what you're saying. So, right, Gen Z, like all the studies say that Gen Z wants sustainable products, but they don't want to pay for the goods, right? So that looks for luxury, that's a problem for luxury. That's why luxury is also going into digital fashion. But going to the realm of just like sustainability in general is, I believe that, again, it goes back to everything having a digital receipt to it. It has more of a story, that you'll understand where it's coming from. You see the different points. And for me, like, there is a lot of value in that. And then where I see more of the value is maybe it's cheaper in the end. Maybe you can see all the different costs, or maybe you are able to put it back into the secondary markets.
To answer your question, though, also, I haven't looked into this cycle well enough, so I'm kind of thinking about this on the fly, but I'm wondering if willingness to pay and quality of goods feed each other in a kind of cycle, which is because you have physical goods where the price is based on perceived value of material quality. If material quality decreases, willingness to pay decreases, because you look at Shein and you say this value, like this quality, this material rather, is not worth this value, for example. I wonder if you can flip what value is predicated upon in a digital world, and we switch to this kind of perceived value of like the story behind the good or the status that it accrues, etc., then you can predicate willingness to pay on something else entirely, and quality of the material matters less in turn. And also, if you can increase willingness to pay through story, through narrative, through content, through context, maybe your margins are higher and you can in turn produce a slightly higher quality good, and it could kind of reverse that cycle a little bit. I don't disagree with the argument that you're making. I think that that's like a fact. I just wonder if maybe there's a slightly different cycle that occurs in a phygital environment rather than a purely physical one. What you reminded me of, though, is another thesis I have quickly, sorry, and then we can go to your question, which is just about, you're talking about, you go on Instagram and all of the questions are like, where'd you get this? Where'd you buy this? Whatever. And then there's this kind of like weird cycle that happens where a girl wears a shirt, I wear this skirt, Jules comes up to me, she says, where'd you buy this skirt? I tell her it's from Sir. She goes to Sir, she buys the skirt, but I see no value that comes from that purchase, even though I technically am the one that influenced her, right? And so one of my theses that I've been working on is how I think, if you look at, I won't run through this whole thing, but if you look at the way that commerce develops over history, it actually kind of all started as P2P, like peer-to-peer, where you were selling to your friends, you were bartering, you would give your friend something, they would give you something in return, and then we went into markets, which is basically just a kind of commercialized version of peer-to-peer, right? I think actually if you watch, it's kind of cyclical and circular in that I think we're coming back to a peer-to-peer commerce market, in that we, through Web3, because everything is tokenized, you can better enable attribution, where you watch the life cycle of this good and who it moved through, who recommended it, where it was bought, and by whom, and for what reason. And you can enable a peer-to-peer market where I actually could technically sell the digital version of this skirt to Jules when she asks me where it's from. It comes through Sir. I just get a small, let's say 5 to 10% cut from that sale, because let's say 5%, because I'm the one that recommended it, and then Sir takes care of the rest of the back end, which is actually happening in China right now through an app called Xiaohongshu, which is, it's effectively a peer-to-peer social media platform wherein influencers post the things that they own, they get to curate their own store from an open catalog back end, which they're pulling all these digital assets from. And then when you buy through their store, they get an automatic cut of each good that's sold. But imagine how much easier that is in a Web3 world when all these assets are NFTs. You can have an open catalog because it's decentralized and it's pulling from all of these catalogs that already exist on the internet, whether it be Amazon or Shopify or what have you. And then we can better enable a whole new version of commerce, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, essentially it's bridging like the affiliate models on chain.
Yeah, exactly.
In the end,
but
it's
way
like,
better.
I don't know if any of you guys have ever used something called Like to Know It or Lemonade, where basically they're posting their links, or Amazon, for example. Amazon now has this insane group of influencers because everyone's creating their own storefront. Because most of it, like 92% of Gen Z actually like buys from recommendations, and it comes first from family and friends first, right? Then secondary goes social selling. So I think it's really interesting because, again, like most of the people who recommend things, you never get paid for it, right? And you probably never will. Like imagine all of your friends, you guys are all in Barcelona, maybe you've never been here before, but putting into context of just like in lifestyle, right? People ask you, oh, what are the best restaurants? What are the best beaches to visit in Barcelona? And you're like, oh, if you've been here before, maybe you have a list on Google, for example, or maybe you have like a list somewhere, an ongoing list that you can share. The same goes for fashion, right? It's like that digital physical opportunity here is like you become your own peer-to-peer store, you become your own seller, which normally we are. We're the ones that recommending everything. We're becoming the new advertisement model. So, yeah, just.
We're gonna make mills, you and I, just from our recs.
That was a bit of an answer to the question, but generally, I want to ask how you can add value to the digital asset from like a fashion house standpoint. So if they're launching a clothing line and they do the digital asset as well, how can they make sure that the digital asset has value on top of just the physical?
I'll go first, and I know you have thoughts on this too. I actually think, ironically, that the majority of the value, maybe this is a bold statement, the majority of the value that a brand can add to their digital asset actually exists in the physical world. So the majority of it is bringing consumers, actually, and I'll make a point about luxury in a second, but bringing consumers to IRL events, exclusive events that they wouldn't have otherwise had the opportunity to join, allowing them to meet influencers, creatives, et cetera, that they wouldn't have otherwise met, allowing them to, by attending these events or by interacting in the real world, then gain digital discounts, perks, benefits, et cetera, that are dropped to their wallet because they attended this event, allowing them to benefit from the referrals that they do to their friends or to their communities and what have you, allowing them to collect context, like collect playlists, collect photos, collect all these things that their piece reminds them of and store it in one place so that they give a little bit more of identity to their good. Membership, for example. So it's really, really all of this, if you really think about it, boiled down, is just like a much better loyalty program. It's like interact with our good, and then we will give you better benefits in turn. I think you brought up 9DCC earlier. The idea that you can push daily interactions to your good, every day you could have a challenge of like, scan your NFC and play this game. Scan your NFC at this store that you went to. Scan this NFC and get a free coffee. You are incentivizing consumers to wear or interact with a good, whether it be makeup or fashion, every single day, when otherwise that piece might just sit in their closet or whatever else, and you're creating this much stronger brand relationship. I'll make one last point, which is just that we talked to a lot of people that work in kind of the luxury sector and how they're thinking about Web3, and one of the heads of Web3 for LVMH was talking about how the majority of their sales, so obviously luxury is really interesting in that 80% of sales come from, it's not even 20, like 10% of their high net worth individual customers, right? But the majority of those customers are actually more willing to make sales in person. But post-COVID, it's become increasingly more difficult to have customers come into stores. So what they're using digital assets for specifically right now is to drive in-store sales. It's incentivizing people to come IRL, and I think that that's so fun that we're using the digital world to promote the real world and then drive sales that way, which is super cool.
Yeah, I think something that's always been interesting to me are like the idea of pop-up shops. So I think someone who does it really good in the space is Basic.Space, where they allow these mini pop-ups all around the world, and they host them together with the brand designer, with the person who's going to resell the clothes, for example. Adidas also did something very similar in NFT NYC. I don't know if any of you guys were there, but they brought a lot of people. They did this huge event. And obviously, what is that digital collectible then for? It's a membership, it's an access pass to go to these amazing exclusive events where there's a famous artist playing. Maybe you have the opportunity to mint/collect the physical version in store. And what is it in the end? It's helping boost commerce, right? Because no one wants to go to the sale anymore or go to the store anymore. And also, how many of you actually go to a mall? Like, sometimes, maybe, not really. So imagine all of those commerce experience now. It's just the retail experience is going down, yeah.
Oh wait, actually that reminds me of another one of my theses to talk about adding value. I think that one of the biggest things, and this is what Jules touched on earlier, one of the biggest things that we're unlocking through digital assets and phygital goods is the idea of co-creation. So if you think about co-creation historically, we've actually been co-creating with brands for at least a decade, if not longer. The idea is that when social media kind of first got started, brands came onto social media to kind of create a culture, align themselves with a culture, and then like percolate that down to their consumers. And what did they do? They got on Instagram. How is culture created? Always through content. And so they said, co-create content with us. And that was UGC. So it was the idea of like, go hike in your Outdoor Voices leggings. Go use this Nike gear when you're running, whatever. And then post photos of it. And we all went and did that very easily. And we were basically acting as like free little advertisers for these brands. But then that kind of went to the next step, which is then we started commenting on Outdoor Voices photos, and we said, we'd really love to see an exercise dress. Like, I want to exercise in a dress. Or we'd say, I'd love to see this in black and white polka dots, and what have you. And then you would get these emails that would say things like, you asked, we listened. Like, you asked for an exercise dress, now we have one. And it's like, that's great, but where's the attribution for that idea? Where's the value being routed back to us, either socially or fiscally? And it didn't exist at all. And I think that one of the most exciting parts about NFTs is the possibility for now consumers to more formally co-create with their favorite brands, create goods, and then be attributed for the origination of that idea and then any value that it creates in the future. Maybe we can allow for a couple questions. If you want to, do you want to go? Yeah, since you have the mic, go ahead.
I just take what we've been saying for the last 20 minutes and combine it all together. The next step for what you're talking about is the metaverse. It's pretty much, no, it really is.
I hate the metaverse.
Why would you? Then you obviously don't understand it.
It's just, I hate talking about it at this like present, because yeah, for sure.
Why? The next step,
for
from
sure,
what you're talking about, combining digital assets. When you're buying digital, you're getting the physical with it. Why would you buy it on your phone when you could buy it in the metaverse?
I think we're creating a new retail experience. It's not only like we're all going to sit and be in the metaverse all day just because Apple came out with their new goggles. But I think it's going to be a new experience, and we're not actually going to think about the technology at all. We're just going to think of the perks that add on to it, right? Every time you sign into a new e-commerce site, and you're like, oh, 15% off. Yes, here's my email. Here's my phone number. This is just all going to happen, but in a way where you're not going to see it, but you're going to be rewarded, and you're going to somehow see it in some, like in your profile, for example.
But to answer your question, why don't people want to shop in the metaverse? Everyone thinks that consumers want these like gamified shopping experiences where like you move to the metaverse and you get to see your goods and you buy. They don't. They don't want it. They don't. It's like actually a horrible shopping experience. People want efficiency. They want to like find the goods that they like, recommended by the friends that they have, and then they want to just do one click and have it show up at the door. They don't want to like wander through whatever metaverse and be like, ooh, look at this thing, and then like shoot it. And then, I don't know, that people are building those things right now. Yes, it's awful.
You didn't enjoy it?
No, no one enjoys this.
So you won't be our target audience.
Pardon?
You won't be our target audience.
No, I done it. Wait, are you building a gamified shopping experience?
No.
Oh my God, I was going to be like, I'm so sorry. I am
Not
sorry.
at all. I'm just really intrigued into the technology behind it, yeah.
If someone is doing that, like obviously argue with me, because I would love to be proven wrong. I just don't think we're there yet.
All right, thanks a lot. This is super interesting. I'm from the project Punch, and we're building for mainstream adoption, like a Web3 super wallet. So it would be super interesting to understand, what are the hurdles you see with all this when it comes to Web3 infrastructure? You have to download, create a wallet, you have to store your seed phrase on a piece of paper, you have to buy crypto and pay 10% in fees just to buy the crypto. What hurdles do you see in the space you are working in?
So I envision it where you're logging in through account abstraction. Basically, you're putting in your email, you're putting in your password, you're getting a wallet created for you, and that it's going to come to the part where you're not really going to think about it. You're just going to make an account like any other thing. You're going to see your rewards. And I don't know if I envision it like this, where it's kind of like a thrift store, where when you give in, you get either a reward, you get discounts, or you can cash out. And I actually envision that that's going to be the future, where it's going to be something very similar, where if you want to use crypto, you can. If you want to use fiat, you can. But if you want to use more rewards towards the brand and pay that way, you will. And eventually, most people will choose that option because they'll get a greater discount on it. So I think we're probably like a little bit against all the terminology that's been reused. We think it's very important. The technology is important, but to be frank, like most fashion people don't give a fuck about what the technology is. They just want a seamless shopping experience. They want to get rewarded for things. They want to be able to connect and eventually get the thing in the mail, whether it's digital or physical.
But to answer your question, there's so many problems. It's like almost hard to list. So many. You named a bunch of them, but there's one. The problem of endless numbers of wallets, no way to connect them. Wallets don't connect to everything. Even connecting a MetaMask is a miserable experience. That's one. Two is the endless jargon and the use of technological terms to reference assets that just should be referred to by the asset itself. Three is an inability to on-ramp and off-ramp with either fiat to crypto or otherwise. Four is a lack of use case, rather, for digital fashion and phygital fashion. Five, a place to store the digital fashion and phygital fashion once you've purchased it. Six, places to use the digital fashion in the digital world. There are literally so many issues, but I think to quickly answer your question about wallets, because I think what you're building is probably very interesting. I just was sent this proposal for kind of a universal wallet protocol. Or it was called a universal identity protocol. But the idea was that, actually, we were talking about this earlier with the ERC 6551 standard. I don't know if anyone saw that proposal come through by Benny Jang. And anyways, the idea is that they're NFTs. They're basically NFTs that can hold a lot more metadata. It's kind of really what it is. It's NFTs.
Little folders.
Yeah, they're NFTs with their own little wallets, kind of. So every NFT can hold their other NFTs that belong to them. So the way that they're pitching it right now is with kind of characters in games, and the characters can own the assets that they wear is one example. But I think what's more interesting that this protocol pitched was the idea that you would have a wallet. The wallet would own a bunch of NFTs. The NFTs would be ERC 6551s, and those NFTs would act actually as login credentials for every platform that you interact with in Web3, and you would just basically redeem your NFT, kind of not burn it, but redeem it every time you logged into a portal instead of having to connect a new wallet every single time. So NFTs would be your entry rather than something else, and I think that could solve a lot of problems.
Yeah, I definitely agree with the F word. So I just curious, but how do you solve it today? If you want to buy, do you go through all these steps with the crypto and everything? You have to do that, right?
Yes. If you go to UNXD right now, for example, or let's say
Fabricant even.
Yeah, the Fabricant. It's you have to connect your MetaMask. You have to have enough ETH in your MetaMask. You have to buy the ETH on Coinbase. It's buy the ETH on Coinbase, have the ETH in your MetaMask, connect your MetaMask, which is not always easy, purchase the item on the Fabricant, have it sit in your wallet, then connect that wallet to wherever you want to wear this digital item. Let's say it's some sort of metaverse on Cyber.
And it's in the end, it's 10 steps, right?
And
what happened to one-click shop? Done. So imagine a lot of fashion people, they see it, they think it's cool, but they're oh, well, I don't know. It takes 10 or 15 minutes to set everything up to finally be able to use it. And in the end of the day, it's you lose a customer very fast.
That's why we're so far. Perfect. Do you want to, just turn it up. Okay, wait. So is your question if there's anything right now in the digital or phygital world that's kind of like the CryptoPunks, in whereby they are going to be revolutionary or set the tone for this industry in the future, but we haven't recognized it yet? Was that kind of the question? It's a good question.
I actually don't think there's anything there yet.
I personally don't think so either, which is unpopular because I think a lot of people would point to 9DCC probably as the primary example of that. Love G. We're good friends. Love him. Don't think 9DCC is it yet.
Yeah.
I don't think we should have luxury black t-shirts, to be completely honest. And I also don't think luxury is defined by the price that you set for a good, despite what I said about status. And
yeah, just to go back, is like fashion has been tradition since day one, right? And we've repeated that tradition, we've repeated that history. And I think the problem is most of the people who have been starting these collections don't really come from the fashion industry, which is very controversial.
they're
right?
Web3 first,
Yeah.
crypto natives.
Which is great. It's amazing. I think that's great. But they don't understand where the principle is. And I'm always the one talking about it because I think the principle of fashion has so much vision, has so much story and history behind it. And you need to build that within any kind of brand that you're building, right?
Yeah, there's such an argument in the space about whether you should be crypto native and build for crypto natives, or whether you should build for Web 2, basically. And I actually think the majority of people think you should build for crypto natives, and I am so anti that. I think that you should build for Web 2 people, because I think when you build for crypto natives, you end up with these really skewed behaviors and thereby features, because you're building for, like, we're a really weird group of people. Like, we are not the norm. And we don't have normal desires, needs, wants, what have you. And when you end up building for us, I actually think it's much harder to then extrapolate for the rest of the world, whereas you could go from hopefully everything will be crypto in the future, and building for the mass population, in my opinion, is a better approach.
Yeah, and just a quick question. Do any of you guys use Lens, Farcaster, like any other... Okay, well, I thought there'd be more, maybe.
Oh my God, I really thought there was going to be more. Brutal. God.
But I think it's hilarious because, again, it's like something new comes out, like Thread, and everyone's like, wow, I need to get on that.
Wait, who created a Thread account? Does anyone know what a Thread is? Too?
Yeah, well...
No way.
Yeah,
This is so insane. I created mine this morning, and pardon? It's so much better. Okay, I created mine this morning, and I was already the 8.9 millionth person to create an account, and it launched last night.
Yeah, I literally woke up this morning, and I was like, what is this? But it's crazy
nuts.
because we talk about it on Twitter all the time, being like, oh, decentralized social media, but no one uses it. Yeah. And the reason is like, are you going to jump ship from Twitter, from Instagram?
Because the average consumer doesn't care about decentralization. Sorry. No one cares about decentralization. Let me put it. I don't care about decentralization.
And that's where we come back is like, are we building for Web 2 or are we building for Web 3?
Yeah. I have one question to add on to that, because we briefly discussed usability and the ease of making a wallet and buying a digital good. I was listening to a podcast recently which was featuring one of the co-founders of the Fabricant, and they mentioned that they have to have their own app to visualize the digital good. So that means that this Web 2 environment where these social media platforms are at, they basically are gatekeepers to decide where and when we will see those digital goods. So how do we get to a point where digital fashion becomes important enough, or we have enough leverage to open that door and to use those Web 2 platforms maybe as a showcase for our digital items? Because I think ultimately that's where the people would want to express their identities still.
I actually personally think you have to start with phygital. Two things. I think that it will start with phygital. I think we'll go phygital first, where the brands that we're already shopping from for our real clothes will begin to introduce digital experiences that then you can kind of leverage on social media. But that number two, this kind of goes back to the Web 2 argument, which is none of these names are probably going to mean anything to the majority of people in here. But if you can go to a Stod, a Sur, Gani, the like really big popular fashion brands for women, and if you can convince them to introduce digital experiences and they begin to promote those on social media and say, hey, you can wear this like AR piece on Instagram, what have you, on TikTok, that's where it kind of starts. And that's why I really think you have to go for this kind of mass adoption first and work your way backwards, because we have no leverage.
But I think it goes back to the main problem that most of these retail shops have is to be able to distribute and sell better and understand more about their customers. Like I go around here in Barcelona and I just ask like different brands, independent brands. I'm like, who are the customers? How are you retargeting them? How are people recommending you? And a lot of them like have no idea. most of them are like, oh yeah, maybe I've worked with a couple influencers at times. We do a couple different events, but it's nothing like consistent. And that's where I see the huge future of the potential of retail and bringing in these digital collectibles, these digital receipts, where people don't understand it, they don't know about it, but then they just claim it like you would on an email, or you would like on social media, or somewhere it's like somehow aggregated into sharing within social media as well.
I think we